November 15th, 2023, a 52-year-old woman stood alone at the altar in a borrowed wedding dress, watching guest after guest walk past her with disgust, whispering that she was too old to be anyone's bride. Just as the ceremony was about to be cancelled, a small voice pierced through the crowd. "That's her! That's my mama!" But here's what no one expected. Why would a child call a complete stranger her mother? And what secret was this older bride hiding that would change everything? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first rays of sunlight crept through the stained glass windows of St. Catherine's Chapel in Portland, Maine, casting fractured rainbows across the empty pews. Margaret Holloway stood in the bride's preparation room, her hands trembling as she adjusted the pearl buttons on her ivory wedding dress. At 52 years old, she had never imagined she'd be wearing white again, much less standing in a church preparing to marry a man she'd only known for 8 months. The dress itself was a borrowed relic from the chapel's donation closet, a size too large, with yellowed lace at the sleeves and a hem that had been hastily taken up the night before. Margaret studied her reflection in the full-length mirror, searching for the young woman she used to be. Her auburn hair, now streaked heavily with silver, had been pulled back into an elegant chignon. The makeup artist the chapel provided had done her best to minimize the lines around Margaret's eyes and mouth. But there was no hiding the truth. She was a middle-aged woman about to become a bride, and the world had very specific opinions about that. "You look beautiful," whispered Elena Rodriguez, the chapel coordinator who had helped Margaret through every step of this unconventional wedding planning process. Elena was in her 30s, with kind eyes that never held judgment, only compassion. She'd been the only person at St. Catherine's who didn't question Margaret's decision or make her feel like a spectacle. Margaret forced a smile. "I look like someone's grandmother playing dress-up." "Stop that," Elena said firmly, adjusting the small veil attached to Margaret's hair. "You look like a woman who deserves happiness, whatever age that comes at." But even Elena's kindness couldn't silence the voices Margaret had heard over the past 2 months. When she and Richard Pemberton had announced their engagement, the reactions ranged from surprised to outright hostile. Richard's adult children, all 3 of them older than Margaret's dating history, had threatened to boycott the wedding. Her own sister, Caroline, had flown in from Chicago just to lecture her about age-appropriate behavior and making a fool of herself. The cruelest comments came from strangers. When Margaret had gone dress shopping at a bridal boutique in downtown Portland, the saleswoman had actually laughed, assuming she was shopping for her daughter. When Margaret explained she was the bride, the woman's smile had frozen into a mask of barely concealed disgust. "We don't typically carry styles for mature brides," she'd said, the word mature dripping with condescension. "Have you considered a nice pantsuit instead?" Margaret had left that shop in tears, which is how she ended up in Elena's office at St. Catherine's, explaining that she needed a dress, any dress, because she refused to let the world's cruelty stop her from marrying the man she loved. Richard Pemberton was 58, a widower who had lost his wife to cancer 3 years prior. They'd met at a grief support group. Margaret had lost her husband David to a sudden heart attack 5 years ago, and their connection had been immediate and undeniable. Richard saw her not as an aging woman desperately grasping at romance, but as a partner, a companion, someone whose laugh made his day brighter and whose intelligence challenged him to be better. But Richard's children saw something else entirely, a gold digger, a desperate older woman trying to trap their vulnerable father. Never mind that Margaret had her own successful career as a school librarian, her own modest home, her own retirement savings. Never mind that she had repeatedly insisted on a prenuptial agreement, which Richard had reluctantly agreed to only because his children demanded it. A sharp knock on the door interrupted Margaret's spiraling thoughts. Elena opened it a crack, then wider when she saw who it was. 5 minutes until we start, said Father Patrick O'Brien, the elderly priest who would be officiating. He was one of the few people who had shown Margaret genuine warmth. "How are you holding up, my dear?" Terrified, Margaret admitted. Father O'Brien stepped into the room, his weathered face creasing into a gentle smile. "I've been marrying people for 43 years, Margaret. I've seen teenage brides, elderly brides, everything in between. Love doesn't consult a calendar before it arrives. Anyone who tells you otherwise has forgotten what it means to be human." Margaret's eyes welled with tears, and Elena quickly handed her a tissue. "Careful, we just got your makeup perfect. Richard is waiting for you," Father O'Brien continued. "And I can tell you with absolute certainty that man looks at you like you hung the moon. That's all that matters." But as Margaret made her way toward the chapel's main sanctuary, she discovered that Father O'Brien was wrong. It wasn't all that mattered. Public opinion mattered. Judgment mattered. And she was about to face both in overwhelming measure. The original plan had been for Margaret to walk down the aisle alone. Her father had passed away a decade ago, and she felt strange asking anyone else to give her away, as if she were property to be transferred. She was a grown woman making her own choice, and she would walk to her future on her own 2 feet. But as Elena opened the doors to the sanctuary and Margaret took her first step into the chapel proper, she realized what a mistake that decision had been. She needed someone beside her, if only to shield her from the stairs. The chapel was half empty. St. Catherine's could hold about 200 people, but Richard's guest list had been modest, and Margaret's even more so. She'd expected perhaps 80 guests total. Instead, she counted maybe 40 people scattered throughout the pews, and the expression on most of their faces made her stomach turn. Richard's eldest daughter, Victoria Pemberton Chase, sat in the front row with her arms crossed over her expensive designer dress, her face a mask of barely suppressed fury. Next to her, Richard's son Marcus whispered something to his wife, both of them looking at Margaret with open contempt. Only Richard's youngest, a daughter named Sophie, had the decency to look uncomfortable rather than hostile. Margaret's own section was worse. Her sister Caroline had brought her husband, both sitting stiffly with faces that screamed disapproval. A handful of colleagues from the library had come, but they sat in the back as if trying to maintain plausible deniability about their attendance. Margaret's closest friend, Janet Kowalski, had sent a card but claimed she couldn't make the trip from Boston, a 3-hour drive she'd made countless times for far less significant events. As Margaret began her slow walk down the aisle, she heard the whispers. They weren't even trying to be subtle. "She's old enough to be collecting Social Security," someone muttered. "Desperate," another voice added. "Absolutely desperate. Richard must be going senile. There's no other explanation. I give it 6 months before she's cleaning out his bank account and filing for divorce." Each comment was a small knife, but Margaret kept her eyes forward, focused on Richard standing at the altar. He looked handsome in his navy suit, his silver hair freshly trimmed, his face radiating joy despite the hostile crowd. That's what mattered. Richard wanted her. Richard chose her. But then Margaret noticed something that made her blood run cold. People were leaving, not just shifting uncomfortably or checking their phones, but actually standing up and walking out of the chapel. Richard's business partner, a man named Douglas Hathaway, got up from his pew and headed straight for the exit, not even trying to hide his departure. 2 women Margaret recognized as Richard's late wife's friends followed suit, their faces twisted in what looked like personal offense, as if Margaret's very presence was an insult to the dead. "This is absurd," one of them said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Eleanor would be rolling in her grave." Margaret stumbled slightly, her heel catching on the dress's hem. She recovered quickly, but the damage was done. More people were standing now, a small exodus of guests who apparently couldn't bear to witness this travesty of a wedding. By the time Margaret reached the halfway point of the aisle, she'd counted 15 people walking out. Father O'Brien looked stricken. Elena had tears in her eyes, and Richard's face had gone from joyful to furious as he watched his guests insult his bride with their departure. Margaret wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, gather what remained of her dignity, and flee this nightmare. But she forced herself to keep walking, one foot in front of the other, because stopping would be admitting they were right. Stopping would mean accepting that she was too old, too foolish, too unworthy of love. She was 3/4 of the way down the aisle when she heard the loudest comment yet. "Someone should stop this circus," a man's voice called out. Margaret recognized him as Richard's golf buddy, a pompous attorney named Bradford Mills. "Richard, for God's sake, what are you thinking?" "She's collecting AARP benefits, not bouquets." Laughter rippled through a section of the remaining guests. Actual laughter, as if Margaret's pain was entertainment. Richard stepped forward from the altar, his face crimson with rage. "Brad, get out. Get out of my wedding right now. I'm trying to save you from making the biggest mistake of your life." Bradford shot back. "You're a widower, not a fool. This woman is everything to me," Richard interrupted, his voice shaking with emotion. "She's everything to me, and if you can't respect that, then leave." Bradford did leave, but not before making a show of shaking his head in disgust, as if he were the reasonable one being forced out by madness. Margaret finally reached the altar. Richard immediately took her hands, leaning in close. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I had no idea they would—" "It's fine," Margaret lied, though tears were streaming down her face now, ruining the makeup Elena had so carefully applied. "It's not fine," Richard said firmly. He turned to address the remaining guests, maybe 25 people now. "If anyone else wants to leave, do it now. If you can't celebrate this marriage with genuine happiness, then you're not welcome here." For a long, terrible moment, Margaret thought the entire chapel would empty. But the remaining guests stayed, though whether out of loyalty, curiosity, or simple inertia, she couldn't tell. Father O'Brien cleared his throat, attempting to restore some dignity to the proceedings. "Shall we begin?" But before he could start the ceremony, the chapel's main doors burst open with a bang that echoed through the sanctuary. Everyone turned to look at the source of the disturbance. Standing in the doorway was a small figure silhouetted by the bright morning sunlight streaming in from outside. As Margaret's eyes adjusted, she saw it was a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing a rumpled pink dress and shoes that didn't match. The child stood frozen in the doorway, her chest heaving as if she'd been running. Her dark hair was tangled and falling out of what had once been a ponytail. Her eyes, wide and searching, scanned the chapel frantically, jumping from face to face. "I'm sorry," Elena said, moving toward the child. "This is a private ceremony." "Are you lost, sweetheart?" The little girl didn't respond to Elena. Her eyes had locked onto something at the front of the chapel, and she began moving forward, walking down the aisle with determined steps that grew faster and faster until she was nearly running. "Wait. Honey, you can't—" Elena tried to intercept her, but the child was too quick. Margaret watched in confusion as the little girl ran straight toward the altar, her small shoes slapping against the stone floor. The child's eyes never left Margaret's face, and there was something in that gaze, recognition, desperation, hope, that made Margaret's heart clench with an emotion she couldn't name. The girl reached the altar and came to an abrupt stop directly in front of Margaret. Up close, Margaret could see the child was younger than she'd first thought, probably only 6. Her face was heart-shaped and smudged with dirt, her clothes slightly too small, as if she'd outgrown them months ago and no one had noticed. "That's her," the little girl said, her voice high and clear in the stunned silence of the chapel. She pointed directly at Margaret with a small, trembling finger. "That's her. That's my mama." The chapel erupted in confused murmurs. Richard stepped forward, gently placing a hand on the child's shoulder. "Sweetheart, I think you're confused. This is Margaret and she's not—" "No!" The girl interrupted, shaking her head violently. "She's my mama. I know she is." Margaret felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. She stared at this strange child, claiming her as a mother, and a cold wave of shock washed over her. She had no children. She and David had tried for years, had suffered through 3 miscarriages and countless failed fertility treatments, before finally accepting that parenthood wasn't meant for them. The grief of that childlessness had never fully healed, and now this girl was ripping open that old wound with impossible claims. "I don't know you," Margaret whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry, but I've never seen you before in my life." The little girl's face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, you have to remember. You have to. Miss Delacroix said you would remember if I found you." "Who's Miss Delacroix?" Richard asked gently, crouching down to the child's eye level. "Where are your parents, honey?" "She's my mama," the girl insisted, pointing at Margaret again. "Miss Delacroix showed me the picture, and she said if I could find her, everything would be okay. She said my mama would know what to do." Elena had her phone out, clearly about to call the police or child services. Father O'Brien looked completely bewildered. Richard's children were watching. The scene with expressions ranging from shock to what looked disturbingly like satisfaction, as if this bizarre interruption somehow validated their opposition to the wedding. But Margaret couldn't take her eyes off the child. There was something about her face, something in the shape of her eyes or the curve of her chin, that triggered a memory Margaret couldn't quite grasp. It floated at the edge of her consciousness, tantalizingly close, but refusing to come into focus. "What's your name?" Margaret heard herself ask. The little girl wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "Lily," she said. "Lily Harper. And you're my mama, I promise you are." Miss Delacroix wouldn't lie. "She said you left something at the hospital a long time ago, and that something was me." The hospital. The word hit Margaret like a physical blow, and suddenly she was somewhere else. Someone else, 28 years ago, in a different hospital, making a decision that had haunted her for nearly 3 decades. Margaret's legs gave out, and Richard caught her just before she hit the floor, easing her down to sit on the altar steps. The chapel spun around her as memories she'd buried deep clawed their way to the surface. She'd been 24 years old, fresh out of college, drowning in student debt and working 2 jobs just to afford her tiny studio apartment. David had been deployed overseas with the army, and she'd been so alone, so scared, so unprepared when she discovered she was pregnant. The baby had come early, too early at just 32 weeks. Margaret had been terrified, convinced something was wrong with her body, that she'd failed this child before it even had a chance at life. The doctors had assured her the baby was viable, that premature births at that stage usually resulted in healthy children with proper medical care. But Margaret had looked at her bank account, $186.47, and at the hospital bills, already piling up from the emergency delivery, and at the NICU costs being quoted to her in numbers that might as well have been in a foreign language, for all the sense they made. She'd been told her baby would need to stay in the NICU for at least 6 to 8 weeks, maybe longer. The social worker had explained, very gently, that Margaret had options, and Margaret had made a choice. A choice she'd never spoken about to anyone, not even David, when he came home from deployment 3 months later. A choice that had become her deepest secret, her most profound shame. She'd signed papers. She'd agreed to a closed adoption. She'd left that hospital with empty arms and a story about a miscarriage that she told so many times she almost believed it herself. But she had a girl. She knew she'd had a girl because she'd held her for exactly 17 minutes before the nurses took her away. She'd counted every second of those 17 minutes, memorizing the baby's face, the way her tiny fingers gripped Margaret's thumb, the small mewling sounds she made, and then she'd walked away. Because she'd been 24 and terrified and convinced she was doing the right thing by giving her daughter to a family who could provide what she couldn't. "No," Margaret breathed, staring at Lily with new eyes. "No, it's not possible. My baby would be 28 years old now." "You're just a child." Lily shook her head, fresh tears streaming. "Miss Delacroix said it's complicated. She said there was a mistake, that I wasn't supposed to be here, but I am, and you're the only one who can fix it." "This is insane," Victoria spoke up from the front pew. "Dad, this girl is clearly disturbed or part of some scam. We need to call the police right now." But Richard was looking at Margaret's face, and whatever he saw there made him ignore his daughter completely. "Margaret?" he said softly. "What is she talking about? What hospital?" Margaret couldn't answer. She was staring at Lily, really seeing her for the first time, and the resemblance was undeniable now that she was looking for it. Lily had Margaret's eyes, the same unusual hazel green that Margaret had inherited from her own mother. She had the same small gap between her front teeth that Margaret had spent a fortune on braces to fix. Even the shape of her hands, small but with long, elegant fingers, was identical to Margaret's, but it was impossible. The timeline didn't work unless— "When is your birthday?" Margaret demanded, her voice sharp with desperation. Lily sniffled. August 14th, Margaret's heart stopped. Her baby had been born on August 14th, 1997, but that would make Lily 28 years old, not 6. "What year?" Margaret pressed. "What year were you born?" Lily looked confused. 2019, she said as if it were obvious. The math made no sense. Margaret's mind raced through impossible scenarios, each more absurd than the last. Had someone cloned her daughter? Was this some kind of elaborate hoax? Or was there something else going on? Something that defied everything Margaret thought she understood about the world. Father O'Brien stepped forward, his face grave. "Margaret, I think we need to stop the ceremony and sort this out. This child clearly needs help and—" "No," Margaret interrupted, standing up so quickly she felt dizzy. She grabbed Lily's shoulders, perhaps too roughly, because the little girl flinched. "I need you to tell me everything. Who is Miss Delacroix? Where did you come from? How do you know about the hospital?" "I don't understand all of it," Lily sobbed. "Miss Delacroix is my caseworker. She's been taking care of me since the family didn't want me anymore. She showed me a picture of you from the hospital records and said you were my biological mother, but that something went wrong with the adoption. She said if I could find you, you might be able to help me because I don't have anywhere else to go." Elena was definitely calling someone now, speaking in urgent, hushed tones into her phone. Richard's children were arguing amongst themselves, their voices rising in a cacophony of accusations and demands. Father O'Brien was trying to restore order, his elderly voice lost in the chaos, but Margaret heard none of it. She was looking at this impossible child who shared her eyes and her birthday, and somehow knew about the most carefully guarded secret of her life. A child who called her Mama with such desperate conviction that it cracked something open in Margaret's chest, something that had been sealed shut for 28 years. "I don't understand how this is possible," Margaret said, her voice breaking. "But I can't just send you away. Not until we figure out what's happening. Are you seriously considering this?" Victoria shrieked, standing up and marching toward the altar. "This is obviously a con. Some social worker probably found your old hospital records and is using this kid to what, exactly? Get money? Ruin Dad's wedding?" "My wedding is already ruined," Margaret said flatly, and the truth of it hit her. There would be no wedding today. Not with this chaos, not with this mystery, not with this child standing in front of her claiming an impossible relationship. Richard moved to her side, taking her hand. "What do you need?" he asked simply. Margaret looked at him. This good man, who had chosen her despite her age, despite the cruelty of others, despite everything. He deserved better than this. He deserved a normal wedding day, a happy beginning, not this circus of confusion and impossible children. "I need to figure out who she is," Margaret said. "I need to know if—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the hope and terror warring in her heart. Lily grabbed Margaret's hand with both of her small ones. "I'm your daughter," she said with absolute certainty. "I know I am. And I need you, Mama. I need you so much." And in that moment, with her wedding in shambles and her secrets exposed and her future completely uncertain, Margaret made another choice. She knelt down and pulled Lily into a hug, feeling the child's thin arms wrap around her neck with desperate strength. "Okay," Margaret whispered. "Okay, we'll figure this out together." Behind her, she heard Richard's sharp intake of breath, Elena's worried voice on the phone, Victoria's furious protests. The remaining wedding guests were talking all at once. some demanding explanations, others already heading for the exits, fleeing this scandal before it could somehow contaminate them. But Margaret didn't let go of Lily. She held this strange, impossible child, and felt something she hadn't felt in nearly 3 decades, the weight of a daughter in her arms. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Lily's arrival was only the beginning. The truth behind who this child really was and how she came to exist would unravel everything Margaret thought she knew about her past, her choices, and the very nature of the sacrifice she'd made all those years ago. But that revelation would have to wait. For now, there was only this moment, an older bride who'd been judged and rejected, a mysterious child with impossible claims, and a secret that had just exploded into the light after 28 years of darkness. The chapel's small conference room smelled of old coffee and furniture polish. Margaret sat at the scarred wooden table, with Lily pressed against her side, the child's grip on her hand so tight it left white marks. Richard stood by the door, his jaw clenched as he texted someone furiously. Elena had left to manage the departing guests and the chaos in the sanctuary, but not before shooting Margaret a look that mixed sympathy with deep concern. Detective Sarah Brennan of the Portland Police Department arrived within 20 minutes, her no-nonsense expression softening only slightly. When she saw Lily, she was a woman in her early 40s, with steel grey eyes and the exhausted demeanor of someone who'd seen too much human misery. "Mrs. Holloway," Detective Brennan began, pulling out a notepad. "The chapel coordinator says this child showed up claiming you're her mother." "Walk me through what happened." Margaret's throat felt like sandpaper. "She ran into the chapel during my wedding ceremony, said her name was Lily Harper, that someone named Miss Delacroix told her I was her biological mother. And are you?" The question was direct, clinical. "I don't see how that's possible," Margaret said carefully. "I gave birth 28 years ago. I placed that baby for adoption. This child is 6 years old." Detective Brennan's eyebrow rose. "So you're saying there's no biological connection?" "I'm saying the math doesn't work." Margaret looked down at Lily, who was watching the detective with wide, frightened eyes. But she knew things. She knew what hospital, she knew the date. "August 14th, 1997, Lily piped up. "St. Mary's Hospital in Boston. That's what Miss Delacroix told me," Detective Brennan wrote quickly. "And who is this Miss Delacroix?" "My caseworker," Lily said, her voice small. "She works for the state. She's been helping me since the Hendersons said they didn't want me anymore." "The Hendersons?" Detective Brennan leaned forward. "Were they your foster parents?" Lily nodded miserably. "They adopted me when I was a baby, but then they changed their minds. They said I was too much trouble, that I had problems they couldn't fix. So I went back into the system, and Miss Delacroix was assigned to find me a new family." Margaret felt her heart splinter. This child, whoever she was, had been rejected, thrown away like defective merchandise. The parallel to Margaret's own rejection today wasn't lost on her. "Miss Delacroix showed me files," Lily continued, speaking faster now. "She said there was a mistake made a long time ago, that my adoption wasn't supposed to happen the way it did. She said my real mama never knew what happened to me, and that if I could find her, maybe she could help fix things." "That's highly irregular," Detective Brennan said, frowning. "Caseworkers don't typically share adoption files with children, especially closed adoptions. And they certainly don't encourage kids to track down biological parents without going through proper channels." "Maybe she was desperate," Richard spoke up from his position by the door. "If the child was difficult to place, maybe this caseworker thought reconnecting her with her biological mother was worth bending some rules." Detective Brennan gave him a sharp look. "And you are?" "Richard Pemberton, Margaret's fiancé." He said it firmly, as if the interrupted wedding hadn't thrown that status into question. "I need to contact Miss Delacroix," Detective Brennan said, pulling out her phone. "Lily, do you know her first name? Or what agency she works for?" Lily's face scrunched up in concentration. "Her first name is Isabel, I think, and she works for Maine Child and Family Services. She has an office in Portland, in a big brown building with a coffee shop on the first floor." Detective Brennan stepped out of the room to make calls, leaving Margaret, Richard, and Lily in tense silence. "This is insane," Margaret finally said. "Even if this Delacroix woman is real, even if she did show Lily my information, none of this explains the age discrepancy. My daughter would be 28. This child is 6, unless she's not your daughter," Richard said gently. "Unless this is all a terrible mistake or some kind of fraud." But Lily shook her head vehemently. "I'm not lying!" Miss Delacroix said there were complications, that something unusual happened. "She said you'd understand once we talked, that you'd know what to do." Margaret wanted to believe her, wanted so badly for this to somehow make sense. But the more rational part of her brain, the part that had survived heartbreak and loss by being pragmatic, kept screaming that this was impossible. Detective Brennan returned 15 minutes later, her expression troubled. "I've got some interesting news." Isabelle Delacroix registered as a social worker with Maine Child and Family Services. However, she's currently on administrative leave pending an investigation. "Investigation for what?" Margaret asked. Her supervisor wouldn't give me details, but reading between the lines, it sounds like there were concerns about her methods and record keeping. Apparently, she's been advocating for some controversial placement strategies that raised red flags. "Where is she now?" Richard demanded. "Can we talk to her?" "That's the problem. She's not responding to calls from her office or her supervisor. As of 3 days ago, she stopped checking in entirely. Her apartment manager says she hasn't been home." Detective Brennan looked at Lily with obvious concern. "Lily, when was the last time you saw Miss Delacroix?" Lily's lower lip trembled. "Thursday morning. She brought me to a motel and said to wait there, that she had to take care of something important. She said if she didn't come back by today, I should come here and find my mama." She pointed at Margaret. "She left me money for a taxi and wrote down the address of the chapel." Margaret felt sick. "You've been alone in a motel for 3 days? You're 6 years old." "The lady at the front desk brought me food," Lily said defensively. "And I'm not 6, I'm almost 7. My birthday is in 2 weeks." Detective Brennan was already on her phone again. "I need to get a unit to that motel, find out exactly what's going on. In the meantime, Lily, you're going to have to come with me to the station. We need to sort out your custody situation and—" "No!" Lily clung to Margaret with sudden, desperate strength. "I'm staying with my mama. Miss Delacroix said she would take care of me." "Sweetheart, I can't just—" Margaret started, but the words died in her throat when she saw the raw terror on Lily's face. This child had been abandoned in a motel by a caseworker who'd vanished. She'd made her way alone to a stranger's wedding based on nothing but hope and a photograph. And now the police wanted to take her away again, back into a system that had already failed her once. Margaret looked up at Richard, silently pleading for guidance. His expression was conflicted, torn between wanting to support her and the very real complications this situation created. "Detective," Richard said slowly, "is it possible for Margaret to provide temporary care for Lily while this gets sorted out? Just for a day or two, until you locate this Delacroix woman and verify the child's story." Detective Brennan sighed. "Mr. Pemberton, this is a complicated situation. We have a child who may have been abandoned by her caseworker, making claims about adoption records that may or may not be accurate. The proper protocol is to place her with emergency foster care while we investigate." "More strangers," Margaret said flatly. "More rejection." "That's what you're proposing. I'm proposing we follow the law and protect this child, then protect her by letting her stay with me." Margaret surprised herself with the fierceness in her voice. "I'll take full responsibility. I'll stay in contact with your department, bring her in for any interviews or examinations you need. But please don't put her through another traumatic placement when she's already been through so much." Detective Brennan studied Margaret for a long moment. "You were about to get married today. Are you prepared to put that on hold, to care for a child who may not even be related to you?" Margaret glanced at Richard, who gave her a small, sad smile. "Our wedding was already postponed the moment Lily walked through those doors," he said quietly. "Let's focus on helping her first." The marriage can wait. Something in Margaret's chest both broke and healed at those words. Richard could have demanded they proceed with the wedding at a later date, could have insisted Margaret hand Lily over to the authorities so they could continue with their plans. Instead, he was choosing compassion over convenience, this frightened child over his own needs. Detective Brennan made several more phone calls, speaking in clipped tones with people Margaret couldn't see. Finally, she hung up and fixed Margaret with a stern look. Against my better judgment, I'm going to allow temporary placement with you. But there are conditions. First, you need to be fingerprinted and pass a background check. Second, you'll be assigned an emergency caseworker who will check in daily. Third, you bring Lily to any appointments or interviews we schedule, no exceptions. And fourth, if we find evidence that you're part of some scheme or fraud, I will arrest you personally. Are we clear? Crystal, Margaret said, relief flooding through her. I need to see ID from both of you and I'll need contact information. Detective Brennan began filling out paperwork. This is highly irregular, Mrs. Holloway. The only reason I'm agreeing to it is because you have no criminal record. You're a stable adult with steady employment. And frankly, our emergency foster system is overwhelmed. But make no mistake, you're under scrutiny. As Detective Brennan processed the paperwork, Elena poked her head into the conference room. Margaret, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but Richard's daughter is demanding to speak with you both. She's not happy, Richard groaned. Of course she isn't. Victoria Pemberton Chase swept into the room like an avenging angel, her designer heels clicking sharply against the floor. Her perfectly styled blonde hair hadn't moved despite the chaos, and her makeup remained flawless. She looked like she'd stepped out of a catalogue for Angry Rich Women Monthly. This has gone far enough, Victoria announced, not even acknowledging Detective Brennan's presence. Dad, you cannot seriously be considering letting this woman, she gestured at Margaret with barely concealed disgust, take home some random child who showed up with a sob story. Victoria? This isn't the time, Richard said wearily. It's exactly the time. This is clearly a scam. Some caseworker feeds a kid a story about this woman being her mother. The kid crashes the wedding. And suddenly, Margaret has a built-in excuse to delay or cancel the marriage while she cares for this supposed daughter. Meanwhile, she's worming her way even deeper into your life, into your finances. That's enough, Richard's voice cracked like a whip. I won't let you speak about Margaret that way. Someone has to be the voice of reason. Victoria's voice rose to a near shriek. You're being manipulated. Both of you! This child is being used as a pawn in some elaborate con, and you're falling for it. Detective Brennan cleared her throat. Ms. Pemberton Chase, I understand your concerns, but I'm handling this investigation. If there's fraud involved, I'll uncover it. Victoria whirled on her. And what if you don't? What if by the time you figure out this is a scam, my father has already signed over power of attorney, or changed his will, or... Victoria, Richard roared, his face flushed with anger. My relationship with Margaret is none of your business. My will is none of your business. And this child, he gestured to Lily, who was shrinking against Margaret's side, deserves compassion, not your paranoid accusations. I'm trying to protect you, Victoria said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. She looked genuinely distressed beneath the anger. Mom's only been gone 3 years. You're vulnerable, and this woman is taking advantage of that. Margaret felt the familiar sting of that accusation. It didn't matter that she'd known Richard for over a year, that they'd built a relationship based on genuine connection and mutual respect. To Victoria, she would always be the gold digger, the opportunist, the woman who wasn't good enough for her father. Your mother would want me to be happy, Richard said quietly. Eleanor and I had 32 good years together. She was my first love and nothing will ever change that. But she's gone, Victoria. And I found something precious with Margaret. Your mother would understand that. Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back furiously. You're making a mistake. All of you? She turned and stalked out of the room, leaving tense silence in her wake. Lily tugged on Margaret's sleeve. Is that lady going to take me away? No, sweetheart, Margaret said, though she wasn't entirely sure it was true. You're staying with me? Detective Brennan finished her paperwork and stood. I'll need you both at the station tomorrow morning at 9 for the background check and formal interview. In the meantime, here's my card. Call me immediately if anything unusual happens, or if you hear from this Isabelle Delacroix. She paused at the door. And Mrs. Holloway, I hope for everyone's sake that you're being honest about your intentions here. After the detective left, Richard sank into a chair and put his head in his hands. This is not how I imagined today going. Margaret let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. That makes 2 of us. 3, Lily added quietly. I thought you'd be happy to see me. Margaret pulled the little girl onto her lap, feeling the sharp jut of her spine through the thin dress. When was the last time this child had eaten properly? I am happy to see you, Margaret said, surprised to realize it was true. I'm just confused and scared and trying to understand how all of this is possible. Miss Delacroix said it would make sense once we talked, Lily insisted. She said there were things in your past that would explain everything. What things? Margaret pressed. What exactly did she tell you about me? Lily frowned, trying to remember. She said you made a sacrifice a long time ago, that you gave up something precious because you thought it was the right thing to do. And she said that sacrifice created the consequences. She used big words I didn't understand. Something about temporal something and biological something. Richard raised his head. Temporal? Like time? Maybe. Lily shrugged helplessly. I'm only 6. I don't know all those grown-up words. Margaret felt a chill run down her spine. Temporal consequences. Biological complications. What was this Delacroix woman talking about? And more importantly, where was she now? Elena knocked softly and entered. I've cleared out the chapel. Most of the guests have left, though a few wanted me to pass along their apologies. She gave Margaret a gentle smile. For what it's worth, I think you're doing a beautiful thing helping this little girl, or making the biggest mistake of my life, Margaret said. Same thing sometimes, Elena replied. I've arranged for the chapel to store your wedding items until you're ready to reschedule. No rush, no pressure. Just let me know when you're ready to try again. If we're ready to try again, Margaret thought but didn't say. Richard stood and took Margaret's hand. Come on, let's get Lily somewhere safe and comfortable. We can figure out the rest tomorrow. As they prepared to leave the chapel, Margaret caught sight of her reflection in a hallway mirror. She was still wearing the borrowed wedding dress, now rumpled and tear-stained. Her carefully done hair had fallen loose, and her makeup was a disaster. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman whose life had just been turned completely upside down. Lily slipped her small hand into Margaret's. I'm sorry I ruined your wedding, she said, softly. Margaret looked down at this impossible child with her familiar eyes and her desperate need, and felt something shift deep in her chest. Maybe Victoria was right. Maybe this was all an elaborate con that would end in heartbreak and humiliation. Maybe Lily wasn't her daughter, wasn't connected to her at all, beyond a shared birthday and a manipulative caseworker's lies. But as they walked out of St. Catherine's Chapel into the crisp November afternoon, Margaret realized something crucial. It didn't matter whether Lily was truly her biological daughter or not, whether this was fate or fraud. The child needed help, and Margaret had the power to provide it. For 28 years, she'd lived with the guilt of giving up her baby. Maybe this was her chance at redemption, or maybe it was just one more loss waiting to happen. Either way, Margaret was in it now. For better or worse, she was about to discover the truth behind Lily Harper's impossible existence. And nothing, not Victoria's accusations, not the detective's suspicions, not even the cancelled wedding, would stop her from finding answers. Because somewhere out there, a missing caseworker named Isabelle Delacroix held the key to a mystery that spanned decades, and Margaret intended to find her before it was too late. Margaret's house on Maple Street was a modest 2-bedroom cottage she'd bought after David died. It had taken years to make it feel like home, rather than just a place where she stored her grief. Now, as she unlocked the front door with Lily's hand still clutching hers, the house felt different, fuller somehow, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. "It's small," Margaret said apologetically as they entered. The living room held a worn sofa, bookshelves crammed with novels, and a reading chair positioned near the window where morning light pooled. "But it's warm and safe." Lily's eyes went wide as she took in the space. "You have so many books," she breathed, moving toward the shelves like they were magnetic. Her fingers traced the spines reverently. "The Hendersons didn't let me have books. They said I'd ruin them." Margaret's heart clenched. "You can read any book you want here. Do you like to read?" "I love it," Lily said, pulling out a copy of Charlotte's Web and hugging it to her chest. "Reading is the only time things make sense." Richard had followed them inside, still in his wedding suit, looking exhausted and shell-shocked. "I should probably head home," he said quietly. "Give you two some space to settle in." Margaret walked him to the door, suddenly terrified he'd leave and never come back. Today had been supposed to cement their future together. Instead, it had blown apart every plan they'd made. "Richard, I'm so sorry. This isn't what you signed up for." He cupped her face in his hands. "Margaret, I signed up for you. All of you, including whatever complicated past comes with you. This situation is bizarre and frightening, but we'll figure it out together." He kissed her forehead. "Get some rest. I'll pick you both up at 8:30 tomorrow for the police station." After he left, Margaret stood in her empty kitchen, still wearing her wedding dress, trying to process the fact that she now had a child in her house. A child who claimed to be her daughter despite a 22-year age gap that made that impossible. "Mama?" Lily appeared in the doorway, still clutching the book. "I'm hungry." The word mama sent a jolt through Margaret's system. "Don't call me that yet," she said more sharply than intended. "We don't know for sure that I'm your mother." "You can call me Margaret." Lily's face fell. "But Miss Delacroix said—" "I know what she said. But until we have proof, real scientific proof, I need you to call me Margaret." "Okay?" Lily nodded miserably, and Margaret immediately felt like a monster. This child had been through trauma after trauma, and here Margaret was, rejecting even the simple comfort of a title. "How about we make dinner?" Margaret said, trying to soften her tone. "When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning. The motel lady brought me toast." Margaret's hands shook as she opened the refrigerator. This child had been starving, while Margaret worried about wedding dresses and cruel guests. "I can make pasta with tomato sauce. Do you like pasta?" "I've never had it." Margaret turned to stare at her. "You've never had pasta?" Lily shook her head. "The Hendersons were very strict about food. We ate a lot of plain chicken and rice. They said fancy foods made children behave badly." As Margaret cooked, Lily perched on a kitchen stool and talked. The words poured out of her like water from a broken dam. Stories about the Henderson family who'd adopted her as an infant, then returned her to state care when she turned 5. They'd claimed she had attachment issues and behavioral problems, though from what Margaret could gather, Lily's primary crimes were asking too many questions and having nightmares. "I kept dreaming about someone's face," Lily said softly. "A woman with sad eyes who was saying goodbye. The dreams made me cry at night, and Mrs. Henderson said I was being dramatic for attention. She said I should be grateful they chose me when nobody else wanted a baby from a drug addict." Margaret nearly dropped the pot she was holding. "What did you say?" "Mrs. Henderson told me my birth mother was a drug addict who couldn't take care of me. That's why I was given up for adoption." Lily's voice was matter-of-fact, but her eyes held pain. "Is that true? Were you on drugs?" "No," Margaret said firmly. "I was never on drugs. I was young and scared and poor, but I was not an addict." She set down the pot and knelt in front of Lily. "Whatever else is true or not true about our connection, that part is a lie. Do you understand?" Lily nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Miss Delacroix said the Hendersons lied about a lot of things. She said my adoption file had inconsistencies, that things didn't add up. That's why she started investigating." They ate dinner in the living room, Lily devouring 3 helpings of pasta, while Margaret picked at her own plate. Afterward, Margaret found some of her old pajamas and rolled up the sleeves and pants so they'd fit Lily's small frame. The child looked like she was drowning in fabric, but she smiled for the first time since entering the house. "Can I sleep in your room?" Lily asked, as Margaret tucked her into the guest bed. "I don't like being alone at night." Margaret thought about the empty motel room where this child had spent 3 nights waiting for a caseworker who never returned. "Of course, we'll leave both doors open, and I'm just across the hall." But an hour later, Margaret woke to find Lily standing beside her bed, tears streaming down her face. "I had the dream again," she whispered. "The goodbye dream." Margaret pulled back the covers without hesitation. Lily crawled in, curling against Margaret's side like she'd been doing it all her life. Margaret stroked her hair, feeling the tangles that spoke of neglect and the rapid heartbeat that spoke of fear. "Tell me about the dream," Margaret said softly. "There's a woman holding me," Lily said. "I'm tiny, like a baby. The woman is crying and telling me she's sorry, that she loves me but she can't keep me. And there's this beeping sound, like machines. Then I feel like I'm falling, and I wake up." Margaret's blood ran cold. She had held her newborn daughter for exactly 17 minutes in the NICU at St. Mary's Hospital. She had cried and whispered apologies and promises of love. And the entire time, monitors had beeped steadily, tracking the baby's vital signs. "Lily," Margaret said carefully, "how long have you been having this dream?" "Forever, since I was really little. Mrs. Henderson used to get mad because I'd wake up the whole house crying." Margaret's mind raced. Could a baby retain memories from their first days of life? She'd read articles about infant memory, how certain experiences could be imprinted even before conscious thought developed. But this seemed too specific, too detailed. Miss Delacroix said the dreams were important. Lily continued sleepily. "She said they were proof of our connection, that memories could survive across something. I don't remember the word." "Across what?" Margaret pressed, but Lily was already falling asleep, her breathing evening out. Margaret lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling while this impossible child slept peacefully beside her. Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was a scam, a manipulation, maybe even a delusion. But her heart, her foolish, broken heart, kept whispering, what if? What if some miracle had occurred? What if her daughter, the one she'd given up 28 years ago, had somehow been given a second chance at childhood? What if the universe was offering Margaret redemption for her greatest regret? Or what if she was being played for a fool by a disturbed caseworker and a traumatized child who desperately wanted to belong to someone? Margaret finally drifted off near dawn, only to be jolted awake by her phone ringing. Richard's name flashed on the screen. She carefully extracted herself from Lily's grip and took the call in the hallway. "Turn on the news," Richard said without preamble. "Channel 7. Now." Margaret crept downstairs and turned on the television, keeping the volume low. The morning news anchor's serious expression filled the screen as a breaking news banner scrolled across the bottom. Body was discovered early this morning in Casco Bay. Police have identified the deceased as Isabelle Delacroix, a social worker with Maine Child and Family Services. Authorities are treating the death as suspicious, and an investigation is underway. Delacroix had been reported missing by her supervisor 3 days ago. Anyone with information is urged to contact. Margaret's legs gave out. She sat down hard. On the sofa, the phone slipping from her nerveless fingers. The caseworker was dead. The only person who supposedly had answers about Lily's origins was dead. Richard's voice crackled from the fallen phone. "Margaret! Margaret, are you there?" She picked up the phone with shaking hands. "She's dead. The woman who knew the truth is dead." "I'm coming over," Richard said immediately. "Don't answer the door for anyone but me until I get there." Margaret sat in the dark living room, her mind spinning. Isabelle Delacroix had left Lily in a motel with instructions to find Margaret if she didn't return. She'd been investigating Lily's adoption, had found inconsistencies in the files, and now she was dead, her body found in the bay. This wasn't a simple custody dispute or a misguided caseworker bending rules. This was something dangerous, something that had gotten a woman killed. Margaret crept back upstairs to check on Lily, who was still sleeping soundly, her face peaceful in a way it rarely was when awake. How was Margaret supposed to tell this child that the one adult who'd been trying to help her was gone? Richard arrived 20 minutes later, still in casual clothes from home. His hair was uncombed and his eyes were bloodshot, but he pulled Margaret into a fierce hug the moment she opened the door. "We need to call Detective Brennan immediately," he said. "This changes everything." "It doesn't change the fact that I have Lily," Margaret said. "She can't know about this yet. She's been through too much already." They sat at the kitchen table, speaking in hushed tones, while Margaret made coffee with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. Richard pulled up news articles on his phone, searching for any additional information about Delacroix's death. "Listen to this," he said, reading from one article. "Delacroix's colleagues describe her as dedicated but unconventional, sometimes pursuing cases with an intensity that concerned her supervisors. She had recently been placed on administrative leave after allegedly accessing sealed adoption records without proper authorization." "She was looking into Lily's adoption," Margaret said. "That's why she was suspended, and maybe that's why she's dead. You think someone killed her to keep those records sealed? I don't know what to think anymore." Margaret wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, seeking warmth. "But Richard, what if Lily's adoption really was illegal? What if there's something in those files worth killing to protect?" Before Richard could respond, they heard small footsteps on the stairs. Lily appeared in the doorway, drowning in Margaret's pajamas, her hair a tangled mess. She looked so young and vulnerable that Margaret's chest ached. "Good morning," Margaret said, trying to keep her voice normal. "Are you hungry?" Lily nodded, but her eyes were fixed on the television in the living room, which was still on with the volume muted. The news was showing Isabelle Delacroix's photo, a professional headshot of a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "That's Miss Delacroix," Lily said slowly. She walked closer to the television, her face confused. "Why is she on the news?" Margaret exchanged a panicked look with Richard. They hadn't prepared for this, hadn't figured out how to break the news gently. "Lily, sweetheart, come sit down," Margaret said, patting the sofa cushion beside her. But Lily was reading the breaking news banner scrolling across the bottom of the screen. Her reading level was clearly advanced for her age, because her face went white as she processed the words. "Found dead," she whispered. "Miss Delacroix was found dead." She turned to Margaret with huge, terrified eyes. "Someone killed her?" "We don't know exactly what happened," Richard said gently. "But yes, she passed away. I'm so sorry, Lily." The child stood frozen for a long moment, then let out a sound that would haunt Margaret forever, a keening wail of grief and terror that spoke of every loss this little girl had endured. She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. Margaret was beside her instantly, gathering Lily into her arms and rocking her. "I've got you," she murmured. "I've got you, baby. You're safe here." "She was trying to help me," Lily sobbed into Margaret's shoulder. "She was the only one who believed me, who said I deserved a real family. And now she's gone like everyone else." "Not everyone," Margaret said fiercely. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." "You promise?" Lily pulled back to look at Margaret's face, her eyes red and desperate. "You won't die? You won't leave me?" Margaret knew she shouldn't make promises she couldn't keep. Life was unpredictable. Death could come at any moment. But looking at this terrified child who'd lost too much already, she found herself saying, "I promise. I'm going to take care of you, no matter what." Richard's phone rang, Detective Brennan's name flashing on the screen. He stepped into the kitchen to take the call while Margaret held Lily, who cried until she had no tears left, then simply clung with desperate strength. When Richard returned, his face was grim. Detective Brennan is on her way here. She wants to talk to Lily about Delacroix, find out if there's anything that might help their investigation. She also said he hesitated, glancing at Lily. What? Margaret prompted. She said we need to be careful. If Delacroix's death is connected to Lily's case, then Lily might be in danger too. Whoever wanted those adoption records kept sealed might view her as a threat. Margaret's arms tightened around Lily protectively. Then we keep her safe. Whatever it takes. Margaret, we're talking about potential murder. This isn't something we can handle alone. Maybe Lily should go into protective custody. No! Lily's voice was sharp with panic. No more strangers. No more being sent away. I want to stay with Mama. This time Margaret didn't correct her. She met Richard's concerned gaze over Lily's head and saw her own fear reflected there. They were in over their heads, caught up in something dangerous that neither of them understood. But Margaret had made a promise. And unlike 28 years ago, when she'd walked away from her newborn daughter because she was scared and overwhelmed, this time she would stand her ground. She stays with me, Margaret said firmly. We'll cooperate with the investigation. We'll take whatever safety precautions the police recommend. But I'm not sending her back into the system. Richard ran a hand through his hair, looking torn between admiration and frustration. You realize this could get dangerous. We might be dealing with someone willing to kill to protect whatever secret is in those adoption files. I know. And you're still determined to keep her. Margaret looked down at Lily, who was watching her with the desperate hope of a child who'd been disappointed too many times. She thought about her own daughter, the one she'd given up, who would be 28 now. She thought about all the years of regret, all the birthdays marked with private grief, all the times she'd wondered what if. Maybe Lily wasn't that daughter. The math still didn't work. The science didn't support it. Logic screamed against it. But maybe she was something equally important. A second chance. An opportunity to do the right thing instead of the easy thing. I'm determined, Margaret said. When Detective Brennan arrived an hour later, she brought reinforcements, another detective and a child psychologist. They set up in Margaret's living room, transforming it into an impromptu interview room. Lily sat beside Margaret on the sofa, answering questions in a small, scared voice. Yes, Miss Delacroix had told her about the adoption investigation. Yes, she'd mentioned finding discrepancies in the files. No, she hadn't explained what those discrepancies were. She said Lily was too young to understand. Yes, she'd seemed worried the last time Lily saw her. She kept checking her phone and looking over her shoulder, like someone might be following her. Did she mention anyone by name? Detective Brennan asked. Anyone she was meeting with or investigating? Lily scrunched up her face, trying to remember. She talked about a doctor once. Said there was a doctor involved in my adoption who shouldn't have been. She called him Dr. Winter? No, Winters. Dr. Winters. Detective Brennan and her colleague exchanged significant looks. Dr. Winters, she repeated, writing it down. Did she say anything else about him? Just that he was the key to understanding everything, and that he was dangerous. Lily's voice dropped to a whisper. She said if anything happened to her, I should tell people about Dr. Winters, that his name would help them find the truth. Margaret felt ice water in her veins. A dangerous doctor connected to illegal adoptions, a dead caseworker who'd been investigating him. And somehow Lily was at the center of it all. There's something else, Detective Brennan said, her expression carefully neutral. We found a package in Delacroix's apartment, addressed to you, Margaret. It was sealed and stamped, ready to mail. Given the circumstances, we opened it as part of our investigation. She pulled out an evidence bag containing a thick manila envelope. Through the clear plastic, Margaret could see her name and address written in neat handwriting. What's inside? Margaret asked. Copies of adoption files, medical records, and a letter from Delacroix explaining what she discovered. Detective Brennan paused. Margaret, I think you need to prepare yourself. What's in this envelope is going to change everything you think you know about your daughter's adoption. Margaret's heart hammered against her ribs. "Can I read it?" "You can, but not yet. It's evidence in a murder investigation." Detective Brennan leaned forward. "But I can tell you this much. If Delacroix's research is accurate, then Lily's claim might not be as impossible as it seems. And the reason why involves a medical experiment that should never have been conducted on human subjects." The room seemed to tilt. Margaret gripped the sofa cushion, trying to anchor herself to reality. "What kind of experiment?" Detective Brennan glanced at Lily, clearly uncomfortable discussing this in front of the child. "We'll need to talk more, but privately. For now, I need to know, are you still willing to keep Lily here, knowing that there might be people who want to keep her quiet? People who've already killed once?" Margaret pulled Lily closer. The child was trembling, but she looked up at Margaret with complete trust, complete faith that this woman she barely knew would protect her. "Yes," Margaret said without hesitation. "She stays with me." "Then I'm assigning an officer to watch your house," Detective Brennan said. "And I need you to be extremely careful about who you talk to and where you go. Until we understand what really happened to Delacroix and why, you're both potential targets." After the police left, Margaret and Richard sat in stunned silence while Lily dozed on the sofa, exhausted from crying and questions. The promised patrol car was parked outside, a uniformed officer visible through the window. "A medical experiment," Richard said quietly. "What could Delacroix have possibly discovered?" Margaret shook her head, unable to articulate the wild theories spinning through her mind. Cloning, genetic manipulation, some kind of age regression? All of it sounded like science fiction, too bizarre to be real, but Isabelle Delacroix had died investigating it. That was very real. Margaret looked at Lily's sleeping face and made a silent vow. Whatever the truth was, whatever impossible explanation lay in those sealed files, she would uncover it. She would find out how this child could be both 6 years old and connected to a birth from 28 years ago, and she would make sure that whoever had killed Isabelle Delacroix to keep that secret buried would face justice, because Margaret Holloway was done walking away from hard truths, done letting fear dictate her choices. This time she would fight for Lily, for answers, and for the daughter she'd lost so many years ago, even if that fight destroyed everything she thought she knew about what was possible. Margaret spent the next morning making phone calls she never imagined she'd need to make. First to the library, explaining to her supervisor that she needed emergency family leave. The woman's skeptical silence spoke volumes. Everyone in town had probably heard about the disrupted wedding by now. Then to her insurance company, adding Lily as a temporary dependent. Then to a pediatrician's office, scheduling a full checkup for a child who'd been neglected for far too long. Through it all, Lily sat at the kitchen table, coloring in a book Richard had bought during an early morning drugstore run. She was unusually quiet, the crayon moving mechanically across the page, while her eyes stayed distant and haunted. Richard had stayed the night on Margaret's couch, unwilling to leave them alone, despite the patrol car outside. Now he stood at the kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, watching the street with tension in every line of his body. "We should talk about what comes next," he said quietly, "after we understand what's in those files." "There's nothing to talk about," Margaret replied, filling out insurance forms. "Lily needs care and stability. I'm providing both. And what about us? What about our future?" Margaret's pen stilled. She hadn't let herself think about that, about how this chaos affected Richard, how it derailed the life they'd planned together. "If you want to walk away, I'll understand. This isn't what you signed up for." Richard turned from the window, his expression hurt. "Is that what you think of me? That I'd abandon you the moment things get complicated?" "Most people would." "I'm not most people." He crossed to her, taking her hand. "Margaret, I love you. That hasn't changed just because our wedding was interrupted by a mystery child and a murder investigation. But I need to know if you're choosing her over me." "It's not a choice," Margaret said desperately. "You're my future."
She's what?"
"Your past, your penance, your second chance at motherhood." Richard's voice was gentle but firm. "You need to figure out what Lily actually means to you, because the way you're clinging to her, it's not just about helping a child in need. It's something deeper. Margaret pulled her hand away, defensive walls slamming up. Of course it's deeper. She might actually be my biological daughter through some method we don't understand yet. How am I supposed to feel about that? I don't know. That's why we need to talk about it, Richard sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I'm not asking you to choose. I'm asking you to be honest with yourself about what you want. Because once we open that envelope and learn the truth, there's no going back. Before Margaret could respond, Lily spoke up from the table. You should marry him, she said matter-of-factly, not looking up from her coloring. He's nice and he makes you happy. You shouldn't give that up because of me. Lily, Margaret started. The Hendersons almost got divorced because of me, Lily continued, her crayon pressing hard enough to tear the paper. I heard them fighting about it. Mrs. Henderson said adopting me was the biggest mistake of their lives, that I ruined everything. I don't want to ruin your life, too. Margaret moved to the table and knelt beside Lily's chair. You haven't ruined anything. You're a child. None of this is your fault. But I'm a problem. Lily finally looked at her, those familiar hazel green eyes swimming with tears. Everyone says so. The Hendersons said it. The social workers say it. Even Miss Delacroix said I was a complicated case. Her voice dropped to a whisper. What if I'm just broken? What if that's why nobody wants me? Margaret gathered the little girl into her arms, feeling her thin shoulders shake with silent sobs. You are not broken. You are not a problem. And I want you, not because you might be my biological daughter, but because you deserve to be wanted. Do you understand? Lily shook her head against Margaret's shoulder. People always say nice things at first. Then they figure out I'm too much trouble and send me back. I'm not sending you anywhere, Margaret said fiercely. I made you a promise, and I keep my promises. Richard watched them with an expression Margaret couldn't quite read. Then his phone buzzed, and his face went grim as he read the message. Detective Brennan is on her way over. She says she has preliminary autopsy results and wants to discuss the files. 20 minutes later, Detective Brennan sat in Margaret's living room with a thick folder and an expression that suggested she hadn't slept since they last spoke. A female officer had taken Lily to the backyard to help check the perimeter, giving the adults privacy to discuss disturbing details. Isabelle Delacroix didn't drown, Detective Brennan said without preamble. She was dead before she entered the water. Blunt force trauma to the head, then staged to look like an accidental drowning. The medical examiner estimates she'd been in the water for approximately 3 days. So she was killed the same day she left Lily at the motel, Margaret said, her stomach churning. Exactly. Which means whoever killed her didn't know about Lily. If they had, they would have come for her too. Detective Brennan opened the folder. I've been authorized to share some of what we found in the package Delacroix prepared for you. The rest is still under seal pending the investigation. She pulled out several photocopied documents, medical records, adoption paperwork, and what appeared to be research notes in cramped handwriting. Delacroix spent 6 months investigating Lily's adoption. What she discovered was part of a much larger operation involving at least 15 other children. 15. Richard leaned forward. You're saying there are 15 other kids in Lily's situation? We don't know yet. What we do know is that all 16 adoptions were processed through the same fertility clinic in Boston between 1997 and 2003. St. Mary's Reproductive Medicine, run by Dr. Leonard Winters. Margaret's blood turned to ice. St. Mary's Reproductive Medicine. That's where she'd gone for fertility treatments after years of trying unsuccessfully to conceive. Dr. Winters had been kind, understanding, promising her that modern medicine could help her achieve her dream of motherhood. I know that clinic, Margaret whispered. I was a patient there. Detective Brennan's expression sharpened. When? 1996 through early 1997. David and I were trying to get pregnant. We did 3 rounds of IVF, but nothing worked. We finally decided to accept that parenthood wasn't meant for us. Margaret's mind raced. But I got pregnant naturally, about 6 months after we stopped treatments. The doctors called it a miracle, the baby you gave up for adoption. Detective Brennan said. Was born at St. Mary's Hospital? Yes, premature at 32 weeks. She spent time in their NICU before... Margaret couldn't finish the sentence. Detective Brennan pulled out another document. According to Delacroix's research, Dr. Winters wasn't just running a fertility clinic. He was conducting unauthorized genetic experiments, something called temporal cellular regeneration. In English, please, Richard said. I'm not a scientist, so I'm paraphrasing what Delacroix wrote. But essentially, Winters believed he could extract viable genetic material from newborns and use it to create... Clones isn't quite the right word. More like genetic echoes. Copies of the original child, but reset to infancy. The room spun. Margaret gripped the sofa cushion, fighting waves of nausea. You're saying Lily is a clone of my daughter? Not exactly. According to Delacroix's notes, the process was more complicated than simple cloning. Winters was attempting to preserve genetic lineage through something he called recursive regeneration. He would take cells from babies born to his fertility patients, babies who were being given up for adoption or had died shortly after birth, and create new infants from that genetic material. Why? Margaret demanded. What possible reason could justify that? Money, Detective Brennan said bluntly. Wealthy couples desperate for children were willing to pay enormous sums for designer babies with specific genetic traits. Winters would identify babies with desirable characteristics, high intelligence markers, physical health, specific appearances, and create duplicates to sell to the highest bidder. Richard looked ill. So Lily is what exactly? A copy of Margaret's biological daughter. If Delacroix's theory is correct, yes. But here's where it gets complicated. The process wasn't perfected. Most of Winters' experiments failed. The babies either died in utero or shortly after birth. Out of hundreds of attempts, only 16 children survived to be successfully placed with adoptive families. Margaret thought of Lily's nightmares, her sense of not fitting properly in the world, her unexplainable connection to Margaret despite the impossible age gap. She dreams about me giving up my baby. She dreams about the NICU, the monitors, the goodbye. How is that possible if she wasn't actually there? Cellular memory, Detective Brennan said. It's a controversial theory, but some scientists believe traumatic experiences can be stored at the genetic level and transferred to clones or genetic copies. If Lily truly is created from your biological daughter's cells, she might be accessing memories that technically aren't hers. The implications crashed over Margaret like a tidal wave. Her daughter, the baby she'd held for 17 minutes before walking away, had been used as source material for illegal genetic experiments. That tiny, helpless infant had been exploited by a doctor Margaret had trusted, her DNA harvested and manipulated to create other children for profit. Where is Dr. Winters now? Margaret asked, her voice shaking with rage. That's the problem. He disappeared in 2003, right around the time the clinic shut down. There were rumors of federal investigations, but nothing was ever proven. His medical license was revoked for ethical violations, but he vanished before any criminal charges could be filed. And the children? The other 15? We're trying to locate them now. Most were placed through private adoptions with wealthy families. Records were deliberately obscured to hide the clinic's involvement. Lily's adoption fell through the cracks because the Henderson family eventually returned her to the system, which triggered Delacroix's investigation when she couldn't reconcile the paperwork. Richard stood and began pacing. So let me get this straight. Margaret gave up a baby 28 years ago. That baby's DNA was used by a mad scientist to create Lily 6 years ago. The scientist disappeared before he could be prosecuted, and now the one person investigating this nightmare is dead. Does that cover it? Essentially, yes. And you think Winters killed Delacroix to keep this quiet? Detective Brennan hesitated. We don't know. Winters would be in his 70s now. But he may have had accomplices. Other doctors at the clinic, administrators who helped falsify records. We're investigating everyone connected to St. Mary's reproductive medicine. Margaret stood abruptly. I need to see Lily. I need to... She didn't know what she needed. To apologize? To explain? To somehow make sense of the fact that this child was both stranger and daughter, both new life and genetic echo of a loss Margaret had never recovered from. She found Lily in the backyard, throwing a ball for a neighbor's dog that had wandered over. The child's face was alight with joy, the first genuine happiness Margaret had seen from her. The officer supervising gave Margaret a respectful nod and stepped away to give them privacy. "Is the detective gone?" Lily asked, holding the slobbery tennis ball. "Not yet." "Lily, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully." Margaret sat on the back steps, and Lily joined her, leaving a careful distance between them. "The detective told me about Dr. Winters and the experiments, about how you were created." Lily's expression shuttered closed. "So I'm not really your daughter. I'm just a copy. A fake." "No," Margaret said firmly. "You're not a fake. You're a person, a real, living, feeling person who deserves love and safety and a future. The way you came into this world doesn't change that, but I'm not your real daughter. Your real daughter would be old now. An adult." Margaret chose her words carefully. "My biological daughter would be 28 if she'd lived. I don't know if she did live. I gave her up for adoption, and I never looked back because it hurt too much. But Lily," she reached out and gently took the child's hand, "you carry her genetics, her potential, maybe even her memories. That makes you connected to me in a way that matters. Do you wish I was her instead of me?" Lily's voice was so small, so fragile. "I wish I'd made different choices 28 years ago. I wish Dr. Winters had never existed. I wish none of this had happened to you." Margaret squeezed Lily's hand. "But I don't wish you were someone else. I'm starting to care about who you are, not who you represent." Lily was quiet for a long moment, throwing the ball for the dog again. "The Hendersons told me I was defective, that something went wrong when I was made, and that's why I had problems. Are they right?" "No." Margaret's voice was fierce. "You're not defective. You've been through trauma that no child should endure. That's not a flaw, that's just pain that needs healing." "Can you heal it?" Lily asked hopefully. "Can you fix me?" "I can't fix you because you're not broken, but I can help you feel safe. I can give you stability and patience and time to figure out who you want to be, separate from all this genetic nonsense." Lily studied Margaret's face for a long moment, then did something unexpected. She climbed into Margaret's lap, tucking her head under Margaret's chin, exactly the way Margaret's mother used to hold her when she was small. "I'm scared," Lily whispered. "Miss Delacroix is dead because of me. What if whoever killed her comes after you too?" Margaret wrapped her arms around this impossible child, feeling the steady thump of her heartbeat. "Then I'll protect you anyway. That's what mothers do." She felt Lily's tears soaking through her shirt, felt the child's desperate grip tighten, and Margaret realized with startling clarity that it didn't matter anymore, whether Lily was technically her daughter, or a genetic copy, or something science couldn't properly explain. What mattered was this moment, this connection, this choice to stay instead of run. Detective Brennan appeared in the doorway. "I hate to interrupt, but there's something else you need to know. We've been monitoring Dr. Winters' known associates, and one of them purchased a plane ticket to Portland yesterday. He lands in 3 hours." Margaret's arms tightened protectively around Lily. "Who?" "Dr. Thomas Reeves. He was Winters' research partner at the clinic. If anyone knows where Winters is now, it's Reeves. And if he's coming here, it's because he knows about Lily." Richard joined them in the backyard, his face pale. "What do we do?" "You stay here with police protection while we intercept Reeves at the airport," Detective Brennan said. "With luck, he'll lead us to Winters, and we can end this." But Margaret's instincts were screaming danger. "And if he doesn't cooperate? If he's here to finish what was started with Delacroix? Then we'll be ready for him." Detective Brennan's expression was grim. "I'm assigning 2 additional officers to your house. Nobody gets in without proper identification. And Margaret..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "If someone does try to get to Lily, I need you to promise you'll let the officers handle it." Don't try to be a hero. Margaret looked down at Lily, who was watching the adults with frightened eyes. I promise I'll do whatever it takes to keep her safe. It wasn't quite the promise Detective Brennan had asked for, but it was the only one Margaret could make. After the detective left, Margaret and Richard took Lily inside and tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Margaret made lunch, grilled cheese sandwiches that Lily had also never tried before and declared the best food ever. They watched a movie, though Margaret couldn't focus on the plot. Too aware of the patrol cars outside and the invisible threat closing in, Richard pulled Margaret aside while Lily was absorbed in the film. "I need to tell you something and you're not going to like it." "What now?" Victoria called. "She's hired a private investigator to look into Lily's background. She's convinced this is all an elaborate con, and she's determined to prove it." Margaret felt a surge of anger. Of course she did. Because, heaven forbid, she accept that her father chose a woman she doesn't approve of. "It's not about me," Richard said quietly. "It's about protecting me," in her mind. "She lost her mother 3 years ago. She's terrified of losing me too, even if it's just to a new relationship. The situation with Lily has amplified all those fears. I don't have the energy to deal with Victoria right now. I know, but her investigator is good. If there's anything in Lily's past that doesn't add up, he'll find it." "And Margaret," Richard hesitated, "what if he finds something that contradicts what we've been told? What if the genetic theory is wrong, and this really is just a traumatized child who latched onto you as a potential savior?" "Then we deal with that when it happens," Margaret said firmly. "But right now, the facts we have suggest Lily is who Delacroix claimed she was. And even if she's not, she's still a child who needs protection from whoever killed her caseworker." Richard nodded slowly. "You've really bonded with her, haven't you?" "I didn't expect to. I thought this would feel like babysitting until the authorities sorted everything out. But Richard," Margaret's voice cracked, "she has my daughter's eyes. She has her mannerisms. When she sleeps, she curls up exactly the way I used to. How can I not feel connected to that?" "Just be careful," Richard said gently. "Grief can make us see what we want to see. I don't want you to get hurt if this doesn't turn out the way you hope." But Margaret was already past the point of protecting herself. She'd opened her heart to Lily, and whatever the truth ultimately revealed, that connection was real. The rest of the afternoon passed in tense quiet. Lily fell asleep on the couch, exhausted from emotional upheaval. Margaret covered her with a blanket and watched her sleep, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the flutter of her eyelashes, the small twitches that suggested she was dreaming. Richard's phone buzzed with a text. His face went pale as he read it. "What?" Margaret demanded. "Detective Brennan. Dr. Reeves never made it to Portland. His plane landed, but he wasn't on it. Someone used his ticket, but airport security footage shows a different person. A decoy," Margaret breathed, "which means the real Reeves is already here. Or—" Richard's voice dropped to a whisper. "Someone else is using his identity to get close." As if on cue, there was a sharp knock at the front door. Both officers assigned to watch the house immediately moved into position, hands on their weapons. Margaret positioned herself between the door and Lily's sleeping form. One officer checked the peephole and relaxed slightly. "It's a delivery person. Package for Margaret Holloway." "I didn't order anything," Margaret said. The officer spoke through the door, verifying the delivery company and tracking number. After several minutes of careful checking, he finally accepted a small, padded envelope and brought it to Margaret. The return address was from St. Mary's Hospital in Boston. Margaret's hands shook as she opened it. Inside was a single item, a hospital bracelet. The tiny kind placed on newborns, and printed on the faded plastic in neat letters was a name, Baby Girl Holloway. Born August 14th, 1997, Margaret's vision swam. This was her daughter's hospital bracelet, the one that had been on her tiny wrist during those 17 minutes Margaret had held her. The one that should have been in some adoption agency's sealed files, not in Margaret's hands 28 years later. There was a note folded underneath the bracelet. Margaret unfolded it with trembling fingers. The message was typed, brief and chilling. "You took something from me 28 years ago. Now I'm taking it back. She was never yours to keep. Dr. W. Margaret clutched the bracelet, realization crashing over her like a tsunami. Dr. Winters hadn't disappeared. He'd been watching, waiting, tracking the children he'd created. And now he'd come for Lily. "We need more protection," Richard said urgently, already dialing Detective Brennan. "He knows where we are. He's been here." But Margaret was focused on the bracelet in her hand, on the impossible proof that her daughter had existed, had been real. And if this bracelet was genuine, then maybe, just maybe, somewhere out there, her biological daughter was still alive, which meant Lily wasn't her only child. She had another daughter, one who'd lived to adulthood, one who might be in danger too. "We have to find her," Margaret said. "My original daughter. If Winters created Lily from her DNA, he might know where she is. And if he's collecting what he thinks belongs to him, then she's a target too," Richard finished grimly. Margaret looked at Lily, still sleeping peacefully on the couch, unaware that the monster from her nightmares had just announced his presence. Then she looked at the bracelet in her hand, proof of a daughter she'd never stopped mourning. For 28 years, Margaret had lived with the guilt of giving up her child. Now she had a chance to protect not one, but potentially two daughters. One, an impossible genetic miracle. The other, a mystery waiting to be solved. But first, they had to survive whatever Dr. Winters had planned. Because the note made one thing terrifyingly clear. He was coming for Lily, and he wouldn't stop until he had her. Margaret closed her fist around the bracelet, feeling its plastic edges bite into her palm. She'd made one mistake 28 years ago that had haunted her ever since. She wouldn't make another. This time, she would fight for her daughter, both of them, no matter the cost. Detective Brennan arrived within minutes of Richard's call, accompanied by a full tactical team. Margaret's quiet street transformed into a command center, neighbors peering nervously from windows as officers established a perimeter around the house. "We're tracking the delivery," Detective Brennan said, studying the hospital bracelet through an evidence bag. "But I'll be honest, whoever sent this knew exactly how to avoid detection. The package was dropped at a third-party shipping store, paid for in cash, no surveillance footage. He's toying with us," Margaret said, watching Lily sleep. "Showing us he can get close whenever he wants, which is why we're moving you to a safe house tonight." "All three of you," Richard nodded agreement, but Margaret hesitated. Moving felt like running, like letting Winters dictate their actions. But looking at Lily's peaceful face, Margaret knew she had no choice. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. They were packing essentials when Margaret's phone rang. "Unknown number." Detective Brennan gestured for her to answer while they traced the call. "Hello? Mrs. Holloway." The voice was cultured, elderly, with an undertone of steel. "Or should I say Margaret? We haven't been formally introduced, but I feel like I know you intimately. After all, I've been watching your daughter grow for 6 years now." Margaret's blood turned to ice. "Dr. Winters, the very same. I must say, you've complicated things considerably by taking custody of Lily. She was supposed to remain in the system, forgotten and untraceable. Instead, you've drawn attention to my work." "Your work?" Margaret's voice shook with rage. "You mean your illegal experiments on babies? Your genetic theft?" Such dramatic language. "I prefer to think of it as preserving potential. Your biological daughter was exceptional. Perfect health markers, high cognitive indicators. It would have been criminal to let those genetics disappear into obscurity with some anonymous adoptive family." "Where is she?" Margaret demanded. "My real daughter, the one you stole cells from." "Is she alive?" A long pause. "Alive? Oh, yes. Though I doubt she'd thank you for suddenly appearing in her life after nearly 3 decades. She believes she was adopted by a loving family at birth. She's quite successful, a physician, ironically. Works at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. Lives a perfectly normal life, unaware that her infant cells were harvested to create 15 other children." Margaret's knees buckled. Richard caught her, holding her upright while Detective Brennan furiously signaled her team to keep tracing. "Why are you telling me this?" Margaret whispered. "Because you need to understand what's at stake." If this investigation continues, if Lily's origins become public, your biological daughter's life will be destroyed. Can you imagine discovering you're not entirely unique? That there are genetic copies of you walking around? The psychological damage alone would be catastrophic. You're threatening her. I'm protecting her. Just as I'm trying to protect all my children. Isabelle Delacroix didn't understand that. She thought she was saving Lily by exposing the truth. Instead, she would have destroyed 16 lives. So you killed her, Margaret said flatly. I did what was necessary. Just as I'll do what's necessary now. His voice hardened. You have 24 hours to return Lily to state custody and convince Detective Brennan to close her investigation. If you don't, I'll ensure your biological daughter learns the truth in the most painful way possible. I'll send her DNA evidence, photographs, medical records, everything needed to shatter her entire sense of self. You're insane. I'm pragmatic. My work was revolutionary, Mrs. Holloway. I gave infertile couples the children they desperately wanted. I preserved exceptional genetics that would have otherwise been wasted. Yes, I bent some rules, but the results speak for themselves. 15 healthy, thriving children who wouldn't exist without my intervention. 16 children, Margaret corrected. You're forgetting Lily. Lily was a failure. The process didn't take place properly. She has neurological anomalies that make her difficult to place. That's why the Hendersons returned her. That's why she'll never be adopted successfully. The kindest thing would be to let her disappear back into the system. Margaret looked at Lily, still sleeping peacefully, unaware that her creator viewed her as defective merchandise. No. Excuse me? I said no. I'm not giving her up, and I don't care what you threaten to reveal. My biological daughter deserves to know the truth about where she came from. You're willing to destroy her life for a child you've known for 3 days. I'm willing to stop you from hurting anyone else. Margaret's voice steadied. You're not protecting these children. You're treating them like property, like experiments you own. But they're people, Dr. Winters. They have rights. And I'm going to make sure the world knows what you did. She heard him exhale slowly. Then you've made your choice. I'll be in touch soon to introduce your daughter to her genetic siblings. I'm sure it will be a fascinating reunion. The line went dead. Detective Brennan swore. We almost had him. He was using a relay system, bouncing the signal through multiple towers. He's going after my daughter, Margaret said, fighting panic. We need to warn her. What's her name? Margaret realized with a shock that she didn't know. She'd given birth to baby girl Holloway, signed away her rights, and never looked back. Her daughter had been renamed by her adoptive family, had grown up with a different identity, and Margaret had no idea what to call her. I don't know, she admitted. The adoption was closed. I never received any information about the family who took her. Detective Brennan was already on her phone, barking orders to trace sealed adoption records. We'll find her. But Margaret, you need to prepare yourself. There's a good chance she won't want contact. She's built a life without knowing you exist. This could be traumatic for her. More traumatic than learning she was part of a genetic experiment. Margaret shot back. Fair point. It took Detective Brennan's team 6 hours to navigate the sealed records, court orders, and bureaucratic red tape. By then, they'd moved to the safe house, a nondescript apartment in South Portland with armed officers at every entrance. Lily had woken confused and frightened, clinging to Margaret while Richard tried to explain they were on an adventure. Finally, as evening shadows lengthened, Detective Brennan returned with a file folder. I found her, Dr. Sarah Chen. She was adopted by a Chinese-American couple who ran a restaurant in Cambridge. Graduated top of her class from Harvard Medical School. Currently works in emergency medicine at Mass General, like Winters said. Married, 2 kids of her own. Margaret stared at the photograph Detective Brennan handed her, a professional hospital ID photo showing a woman in her late 20s with kind eyes and a confident smile. Her face was different from Margaret's, shaped by her adoptive father's Asian heritage. But those eyes, those were Margaret's hazel green eyes, passed down through genetics despite different upbringings. She has children, Margaret whispered. I'm a grandmother. She also has no idea any of this exists. I spoke with her supervisor at Mass General. Dr. Chen is working a shift right now. We can have officers bring her in for protection, but Margaret, this conversation needs to happen delicately. I want to tell her myself, Margaret said. She deserves to hear the truth from me, not strangers. That's not protocol. I don't care about protocol. Margaret's voice cracked. I gave her up once because I was scared and overwhelmed. I'm not letting her face this alone. I'm her mother. Detective Brennan studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I'll arrange a video call. But I'm monitoring it, and if anything goes wrong, I'm pulling you out immediately. They set up a laptop in the safe house's living room. Lily watched curiously from the couch, sensing something monumental was happening. Richard stood behind Margaret, his hands on her shoulders, lending silent support. The video call connected. Sarah Chen's face appeared on screen, looking exhausted and wary. She was in a hospital office, still wearing scrubs, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Dr. Chen, my name is Margaret Holloway, Margaret began, her voice shaking. I know this is going to sound insane, but I'm your biological mother. Sarah's expression didn't change. I know, Margaret blinked, thrown. You know? A man contacted me this morning. Called himself Dr. Leonard Winters. Said he had information about my birth family. Sarah's voice was carefully controlled, but Margaret could see tension in every line of her body. He told me I was part of a genetic experiment, that there are 15 other people walking around with my DNA, that my biological mother abandoned me because she didn't want me. That's not true, Margaret said desperately. I didn't abandon you because I didn't want you. I was 24, drowning in poverty, terrified I couldn't give you the life you deserved. I thought I was doing the right thing, and now you want what? Absolution. A relationship? Sarah's tone was sharp. I have parents, good parents who raised me and loved me, and never made me feel like I was a second choice. I don't need a biological mother suddenly appearing because of some scandal. Margaret felt each word like a physical blow. This was the daughter she'd mourned for 28 years, and that daughter wanted nothing to do with her. I don't want anything from you except to warn you. Dr. Winters is dangerous. He killed someone to keep his experiments secret. You and the other children he created are in danger. He told me that too. Said if I cooperated with any investigation, he'd make sure my children found out they're related to a dozen other kids through some Frankenstein experiment. Sarah's composure cracked slightly. My kids are 7 and 5. How am I supposed to explain this to them? The same way I'm explaining it to Lily. Margaret gestured off-screen to where Lily sat watching. One of the children Winters created from your DNA. She showed up at my wedding claiming to be my daughter, and in a way, she is. She's your genetic copy, which makes her my daughter too. Sarah leaned closer to the screen, eyes widening as Lily moved into frame. Oh my God, she has my eyes. My adoptive mother's chin structure, her professional composure shattered. This is real. He really did this. He's done it to 15 other families too. And he'll keep doing it unless we stop him. Margaret reached out instinctively, her hand touching the screen where Sarah's image showed. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I'm begging you, help us find him before he hurts anyone else. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at Lily through the video connection. She looked scared. She's been through hell. Her adoptive family returned her to foster care. Her caseworker was murdered, trying to protect her, and now the monster who created her is threatening to take her away. Margaret's voice broke. I know I failed you 28 years ago. Let me do better with her. Help me keep her safe. You want me to testify about Winters? Provide DNA evidence? I want you to survive whatever he's planning. But yes, if you're willing, your testimony could stop him from ever doing this again. Sarah rubbed her face tiredly. I need to think. It's too much. I need time to process. I understand. But please be careful. Winters has already killed once. He won't hesitate to... An alarm suddenly blared through the safe house. Officers shouted, rushing toward the windows. Detective Brennan grabbed her weapon, positioning herself between Margaret and the door. He found us, she said grimly. Winters is here. On the laptop screen, Sarah's eyes widened in horror. Mom, what's happening? The word mom sent electricity through Margaret's system, but there was no time to process it. She grabbed Lily, pulling her close while Richard moved to shield them both. Gunshots erupted outside. The tactical team returned fire. Through the window, Margaret saw a figure moving in the darkness, elderly but spry, wearing a long coat and carrying something that gleamed metallically in the streetlight. "Surrender the child," Winter's voice echoed from outside. "She's my property, my creation. You have no legal right to keep her." "You have no rights at all," Detective Brennan shouted back. "You're under arrest for murder, kidnapping, and illegal human experimentation. I gave those children life. Without me, they wouldn't exist. I'm their true parent." Margaret felt Lily trembling against her. The little girl who'd called her Mama, despite impossible circumstances, who'd dreamed memories that weren't technically hers, who'd been rejected and experimented on and treated like defective merchandise her entire short life. "No," Margaret said quietly. Then louder, "No, she's not yours. She's mine." She stood despite Richard's protests, despite Detective Brennan ordering her to get down. She walked to the window where Winters could see her, Lily clutched protectively in her arms. "I gave her up once," Margaret shouted into the night. "I let fear and shame make me abandon my daughter. I won't make that mistake twice." "You want Lily? You'll have to kill me first, because I'm not letting you touch her." On the laptop, still connected, Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. "Neither am I. I'm a doctor, Dr. Winters. I save lives. You destroy them. And I'm not going to let you destroy any more. I'll testify. I'll provide DNA. I'll do whatever it takes to stop you." The standoff stretched for endless seconds. Then Winters lowered his weapon. Margaret now saw it was some kind of tranquilizer gun, probably meant to sedate Lily for transport. His shoulders sagged, suddenly looking every bit of his 70-plus years. "She was perfect," he said softly. "My process was perfect. These children were supposed to be my legacy, proof that human genetics could be controlled and optimized. But they're just people, messy, unpredictable people who refuse to behave like the experiments they are." "Because they're not experiments," Margaret said. "They're children. And they deserve better than you." The tactical team moved in, surrounding Winters. He didn't resist as they cuffed him, didn't fight as they read his rights. He simply stared at Lily with an expression that might have been regret, or might have been frustration that his greatest work was imperfect. As they led him away, he looked back at Margaret one final time. "I gave you a second chance at motherhood. You should be thanking me." "You gave me nothing," Margaret replied. "But I'm taking it anyway, all of it. The complicated truth, the impossible child, the messy reality. I'm keeping her, and I'm keeping the daughter I should have fought for 28 years ago. And there's nothing you can do about it." Winters was gone, loaded into a police van to face murder charges and a lifetime of legal consequences. The safe house slowly calmed, officers standing down as the immediate threat passed. On the laptop, Sarah was crying silent tears. "I need to meet her, Lily, and you. I need to understand all of this." "Tomorrow," Margaret said. "Come to Portland tomorrow, and we'll figure this out together." The next morning it dawned clear and cold. Margaret stood in her own kitchen. The police had cleared her to return home, making pancakes, while Lily sat at the table drawing pictures of everyone she'd met over the past few days. The child's resilience amazed Margaret. Despite everything she'd endured, Lily was already dreaming of birthday parties and school, and having a real family finally. Richard was on the phone with Victoria, who'd heard about the arrest and was frantically apologizing for doubting Margaret. The private investigator she'd hired had actually helped police locate 2 of the other genetic copy children, who were now being offered counseling and support. When Sarah Chen knocked on the door at 10 a.m., Margaret's hands shook as she opened it. Her biological daughter stood on the porch looking uncertain, carrying flowers and a teddy bear. "I didn't know what to bring," Sarah said awkwardly. This felt strange, like meeting someone for the first time and reuniting all at once. "It is strange," Margaret agreed. "But come in anyway." Sarah entered slowly, her eyes finding Lily immediately. The two stared at each other, original and genetic echo, adult and child, connected by science but not by choice. "Hi," Lily said shyly. "Are you my sister or my mom?" Miss Delacroix said it was complicated. Sarah laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. "It's definitely complicated. But I guess I'm both." "Sort of." "Can I hug you?" Lily asked. Sarah nodded, and Lily launched herself forward, wrapping small arms around her genetic source. Sarah held her carefully, as if Lily might break, tears streaming down her face. "I have so many questions," Sarah whispered. "Me too," Margaret said. "We all do, but we have time now. All the time we need." They spent the day together, Margaret, Sarah, Lily and Richard, who'd quietly proposed they reschedule the wedding for next month. "Third time's the charm," he'd said with a wry smile. They shared stories, examined photographs, marveled at shared mannerisms that genetics had preserved across impossible circumstances. Sarah's children came by in the afternoon, brought by her husband who looked shell-shocked but supportive. The kids were fascinated by Lily, especially when they learned she was sort of like a special aunt, but also sort of like a cousin. "Can we keep her?" Sarah's 5-year-old asked. "She's fun. She's staying with Margaret," Sarah explained gently. "But we'll visit lots. She's family now, family." The word Margaret had longed for, fought for, nearly died for. She looked around her cramped living room, now filled with voices and laughter and complicated relationships that defied easy definition. Elena from St. Catherine's Chapel called to say they'd cleared the sanctuary for a new wedding date. Detective Brennan stopped by with paperwork, finalizing Margaret's custody of Lily. Even Victoria appeared briefly, stiffly apologizing and bringing an expensive doll for Lily as a peace offering. As evening fell and guests departed, Margaret tucked Lily into bed. The child had officially moved into the spare bedroom, which they'd spent the afternoon decorating with posters and books. "Did we have a good day?" Lily asked sleepily. "The best day," Margaret confirmed. "Is Dr. Winters going to come back?" "No, sweetheart. He's in jail, and he's going to stay there for a very long time. You're safe now, and Sarah? Will she come back?" "As often as she can. She wants to know you, to be part of your life." Lily smiled, eyes drifting shut. "So I have 2 moms now. That's like double the normal amount." Margaret laughed through tears. "Yes, I suppose it is. I like it. Double moms means double love." Lily yawned hugely. "Mama Margaret." "Yes?" "I'm glad I crashed your wedding, even though it was scary, because now I have you." Margaret kissed her forehead. "I'm glad too. Sleep well, little one." She joined Richard downstairs, where he'd cleaned up the kitchen and poured 2 glasses of wine. They sat on the porch, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. "Are you ready to try this again?" Richard asked, gesturing to an imaginary altar. "Third wedding attempt, knowing that your life now includes a 6-year-old genetic miracle and a complicated relationship with your biological daughter." "I am," Margaret said without hesitation. "Are you?" "This isn't the quiet retirement you were probably imagining. Quiet is overrated." He took her hand. "I fell in love with you because you're strong and kind and because you see people for who they really are, not who society says they should be. The fact that you're willing to fight for a child everyone else rejected just proves I chose correctly." They sat in comfortable silence, Margaret thinking about the journey from rejected bride to fiercely protective mother. A week ago she'd been standing at an altar, watching guests flee in disgust because she was too old to deserve love. Now she had a family more complex and precious than anything she could have imagined. "Eleanor would have liked you," Richard said suddenly. "My late wife? She always said the best families are the ones we build from love, not biology." "I think she was right," Margaret said, squeezing his hand. Inside, Lily's nightlight glowed softly. Tomorrow, Margaret would call the school about enrollment. She'd take Lily shopping for clothes that actually fit. She'd schedule therapy appointments to help heal trauma that ran deeper than anyone could see. She'd navigate the complicated relationship with Sarah, who was trying to integrate this bizarre truth into her previously normal life. But tonight, Margaret simply sat on her porch with the man she loved, grateful for chaos, blessed by complication, and finally at peace with the messy, imperfect, beautiful reality of being a mother. The wedding, when it happened 3 weeks later, was small and private. Just immediate family, Elena from the chapel, Detective Brennan, who'd become a friend, and Lily serving as flower girl in a pink dress she'd chosen herself. When Father O'Brien asked if anyone objected to the union, Lily's voice rang out clear and happy. "I object to it taking this long. Can we get to the cake already?" The small gathering laughed, and Margaret married Richard with tears of joy running down her face. Not because the wedding was perfect, it wasn't. Not because her family was traditional, it definitely wasn't. But because she'd finally learned that love worth having is worth fighting for. No matter what age you are, no matter how complicated the circumstances, and no matter how many people say you're not supposed to have it. And as she kissed her husband, while her impossible daughter cheered, and her biological daughter, her Sarah, wiped away happy tears, Margaret Holloway Pemberton knew one truth with absolute certainty. She was exactly where she was meant to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.